Hello everyone, in this video we are going to discuss about female sexual cycle and first week of development, which include ovulation, the event occurring from ovulation to implantation. These are the topics around which our discussion will turn around. So, what is female sexual cycle? Female sexual cycle is a monthly rhythmic sexual cycle occurring in the female during the normal reproductive period. The duration of female sexual cycle is usually 28 days, but under the physiological condition, it may vary from 20 and 40 days. So it changes. It varies with person to person or female to female. Traditionally, the first day of menstrual bleeding is taken as the first day of female sexual cycle. In this video, we are going to discuss more on ovarian cycle and endometrial cycle, and little bit of overview on cervix and cyclical changes in cervix and cyclical changes in vagina. Now, talking about the ovarian cycle. Ovarian cycle is the rhythmical changes in the ovary during each female sexual cycle of about 28 days. In each cycle, a single mature ovum is released from the ovary. I will show the figure in the next slide. In each cycle, a single mature ovum is released from the ovary. These changes mainly depend upon the two hormones, that is gonadotropic hormones, that is FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone, secreted by the anterior pituitary. The period of 28 days of the ovarian cycle is further divided into three phases. The three phases are pre-ovulatory phases or follicular phases, ovulation, and post-ovulatory phase or luteal phases. The duration of the pre-ovulatory phase is it starts from 5th day of menstrual cycle till the time of ovulation. This phase is not constant. It varies according to person to person. In these phases, the changes in the ovary is mostly due to follicular stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone, also plays a role in these phases, but in the latter part of this phase, luteinizing hormone comes into action. In this phase, 10 to 15 primordial follicle starts maturing, but only one matures fully and the rest undergo atresia. What happens? The main hormone playing the role here is FSH. We should note one point: this FSH hormone is not necessary for the development of the primordial follicle to primary follicle, but without it, primary follicle die and become atretic. So it is important, follicular stimulating. Now, talking about the ovulation. Ovulation refers to the release of secondary oocyte from the ovary following rupture of the Graafian follicle into the peritoneal cavity. It usually occurs at the 14 days of menstrual cycle or 14 days of menstrual cycle. The hormonal influence included in this phase is FSH and LH. The FSH ovulatory peak of FSH occurs 2 days prior to the ovulation, which increases the LH receptor in the granulosa cell. So, the changes or event occurring in the ovulation are release of secondary oocyte from the ovary following rupture of the Graafian follicle. What are the different changes that occurs in the Graafian follicle? There occurs the rapid swelling of the follicle. How the rapid swelling of the follicle? Due to the rapid growth of new blood vessels into the follicular wall and the secretion of prostaglandin into follicular tissue, it causes the diffusion of plasma into the follicular fluid, which causes further swelling of the follicle. Now there occurs the formation of stigma. What is stigma? Stigma is the most convex part of the follicle, which protrudes like a nipple in the peritoneal cavity. Now, due to the stretching of the outer wall of the follicle, it causes the release of proteolytic enzyme. These proteolytic enzyme, which are released from lysosome in theca externa cell, is activated by progestins. Now, this proteolytic enzyme causes dissolution of the capsular wall and is further weakening. Now, within 30 minutes of protrusion, fluid oozes out from the stem, followed by rupture of the follicle and with the release of ovum surrounded by the corona radiata, so which causes the rupture of the Graafian follicles. Now, the secondary oocyte or the ovum is released into the peritoneal cavity, which are received by the fimbriated end of the fallopian tube. Now, what are the significance of LH surge. The significance of LH surge causes elevation in the concentration of maturation promoting factor, which causes oocyte to complete meiosis 1 and initiate meiosis 2. It also stimulates production of progesterone by the follicular stromal cells. It also causes follicular rupture and ovulation. Now talking about the post-ovulatory phase, this phase remains nearly constant, that is 14 days, and the hormone playing role main influence is luteinizing hormone. And what are the major events occurring in this luteal phase? It includes the formation of corpus luteum. Now how corpus luteum is formed? First of all, corpus hemorrhagicum is formed. How corpus hemorrhagicum is formed? Following ovulation, the outer wall of the Graafian follicle collapses and it gets filled with the blood, due to which it is called as corpus hemorrhagicum. Now soon the granulosa cell and the theca cell of the follicle lining begin to proliferate, and the clotted blood is rapidly replaced by the yellowish lipid-rich luteal cells, which is called as corpus luteum. Now, if there is no fertilization and pregnancy does not occur, then corpus luteum begins to involute or regress after 24th day of the sexual cycle and is replaced by the whitish scar tissue, which is called as corpus albicans. Now they also, if the fertilization occurs, then it sustains for 3 months forming corpus luteum of pregnancy, because it serves as the major sources of progesterone for the maintenance of gestation. Let's appreciate these all from this beautiful diagram from the Langman. Pulsatile release of gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus stimulates the gonadotrophic cell from the anterior pituitary. This gonadotropic cell causes the pulsatile release of gonadotropin. This gonadotropin includes follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Follicular stimulating hormone causes the maturation of follicle, and LH hormone also plays role for maturation of the follicle. Now during prior to ovulation, LH surge occurs, which causes the release of ovum, and in the latter stages, in the luteal stages, the luteinizing hormone helps in the development of the corpus luteum. First, corpus hemorrhagicum is formed because the outer wall of the Graafian follicle is collapsed. It is filled with blood. Now this blood gets clotted, and clotted blood is replaced by the yellowish lipid-rich luteal cell, which gives rise to corpus luteum. Either this corpus luteum will be corpus albicans or corpus luteum of pregnancy, which will be sustained for 3 months. Now these are the various stages of the follicle, which includes primordial follicles, growing follicles consisting growing follicles, and vesicular follicles. You can appreciate this. It was already discussed in the first video. I have shown this picture just to have this what happens. The ovarian follicle that reaches the maturity are shed off an ovum. What happens? Primordial follicle is converted into mature ovarian follicle to shed off an ovum. It releases the ovum, and the ruptured follicle gets converted, or empty Graafian follicle after release of ovum is converted into corpus luteum. Now this figure is saying the same thing, that is the gonadotropin releasing hormone stimulates the anterior pituitary, and this anterior pituitary releases gonadotrophic hormone. FSH causes the release of stimulates the growth of the follicle, and LH and FSH both are required for the maturation of the follicle. And in the latter part of the ovarian cycle, the LH hormone comes into play for the formation of the corpus luteum. We will discuss this endometrial cycle in the upcoming slide. And this figure is showing that the formation of stigma due to the increased pressure. There is a nipple-like projection that protrudes into the peritoneal cavity. Now the fluid oozes out, and the ovum along with the few granulosa cells are released, which are received by the femthietary end of the fallopian tube. Now talking about the endometrial cycle. What is endometrial cycle? Endometrial cycle is the cyclical changes that occurs at the layer of endometrium during the period of 28 days of female sexual cycle. This endometrial cycle is further divided of 20. This endometrial cycle of 28 days is further divided into proliferative phase, secretory phase, and menstrual phase or bleeding phase. So before talking about the endometrial cycle, we must be aware about the different layers of endometrium, the different layers of uterus. The uterus, it will be dealt in detail in the topic of female reproductive anatomy, but let's have a quick overview. The endometrium, it is an a sketched diagram only, not a true diagram, just for the overview. The endometrium, the uterus consists of three layers. They are endometrium, myometrium, muscle layer, which is thickest, and perimetrium. The endometrium is further divided into two layers. Outer one is stratum basale and inner one is stratum functional. So this stratum basale is supplied by the basal straight artery, whereas the stratum functional is supplied by the spiral artery, which extends from 6 days of menstrual cycle or 6 days of female sexual cycle to the 14th day. It coincides with the follicular phase, and the hormone which is responsible for this proliferative phase is estrogen, which is secreted from the developing Graafian follicle. So the name of the phase is itself suggesting proliferative phase. Proliferative phase, that is something is proliferating here. So what is proliferating here? The blood vessels in the stratum functional occurs, synthesis, blood vessel formation, that is angiogenesis, occurs in the stratum functional. Similarly, thickness of endometrium is also increased, and the endometrial glands are also stimulated to grow in this phase. Now, talking about the secretory phase, in secretory phase, which extends from 15th day of the menstrual cycle to the 28th days of the menstrual cycle, it coincides with the luteal phase, and the hormone responsible for this phase is estrogen and progesterone, which is secreted by the corpus luteum. So what happens in the secretory phase? In secretory phase, there is further elongation and coiling of the endometrial gland. The characteristic feature is called as prominent cork-screw-shaped gland. Similarly, blood supply is further increased, that is increased vascularity, and the thickness of endometrium is further increased. So what we have to focus in endometrial cycle in three portions, that is blood vessel, other is endometrium thickness, and endometrial gland. So now talking about the menstrual phases is also called as bleeding phases. It extends from 3 to 5 days. So 24 hours before the end of the menstrual cycle, there occurs a sharp decline in the level of estrogen and progesterone, so which causes the intense spasm of the spiral artery. What is a spiral artery? The artery which was supplying stratum functional, which causes spasm of the or constriction of the spiral artery causes the necrosis of the stratum functional. This stratum functional, due to which the stratum functional gets slouched off and the blood vessel get open up, due to which blood oozes out and endometrial debris and the menstrual blood flows out. So here is one question for you: does menstrual blood clot or not? Comment me down. Now, this is the same thing I have shown with histology from the Deep Fiore's Atlas of Histology. This is the histological image of the proliferative phase or follicular phase of the uterus, which shows here endometrium, myometrium. In endometrium, which consists of two layers, functional is stratum functional and stratum basale. In stratum functional layer, blood vessels are stimulated to grow. Similarly, uterine glands are also stimulated, and the thickness of Talking about the secretory phase, in this phase, endometrial glands are further stimulated, which shows characteristic corkscrew shaped, and the blood vessels are further stimulated, and the thickness of the functional layer is stratum functional is further increased. You can see here is the thickness is this much, and the thickness here is increased. Now, talking about the menstrual phase, there occurs the blood in the we can appreciate the disintegrated stratum functional, which gets lodged up, and the splitting of the blood or splitting of the blood or blood in disintegrating uterine gland, blood clots in the lamina propria. We can appreciate it from the figure. Now this is the same image which is showing the summary diagram from the Langevin embryology. The event up to here, that is ovulatory phase, we have already discussed it. Ovulatory ovarian cycle, we have already discussed what happens. The ovulatory phase or the follicular phase coincide with the proliferative phase, and the hormone mainly playing the role here is estrogen, which is secreted by the developing Graafian follicle, which causes increase in the layer of the thickness of the endometrium. Now in post-ovulatory phase or in luteal phase, the endometrium is also endometrial thickness is further increased, and the spiraling of the artery is further increased. Now if the pregnancy does not occur, then this corpus luteum is degenerated, the level of estrogen and progesterone is further decreased, and the layer of the endometrium is closed off. Now if the pregnancy occurs, then the corpus luteum will be converted into corpus luteum pregnancy and is sustained for 3 to 4 months, secreting progesterone, which maintains the thickness of the endometrium and also maintains the gestation. Now this figure is the same which I have already discussed. You can see it by pausing the video. Now this is the hormonal control of the menstrual cycle. What happens initially, the gonadotropin are released by the pulsatile secretion of the gonadotropin releasing hormone, and the FSH, which causes FSH and LH causes the development of the ovarian follicle, and that FSH also causes stimulates the granulosa cell. Estrogen is secreted. That estrogen is responsible for maintenance of the proliferative phase. Now if the further LH surge occurs, and that LH surge causes the ovulation, and after post-ovulatory phase, LH causes luteinizing hormone causes the development of the corpus luteum, and there occurs the release of the progesterone from the corpus luteum, which causes the which maintains the secretory phase, or further the thickness of the endometrium is increased. And if by some reason pregnancy does not occur, then the layer of the endometrium gets slouched off. Now talking about the other changes what occurs, that the other changes occurs mainly in the cervix, that is mucosal lining of the cervix. In these phases, in menstrual phases, they does not undergo de-squamation like that of the endometrium. In this phase, in proliferative phase, what happens, the secretion of the mucosal cells of the endocervix is thin, watery and alkaline. Cervical mucus at the time of ovulation is thinnest and have maximum elasticity, which show characteristics fern-like pattern. That is, cervical mucosal secretion is placed on the dry glass slide. It causes, after some time, it shows characteristic fern-like pattern. Similarly, this phase, proliferative phases, the thin watery nature of the cervix favors the transport of sperm. Similarly, in secretory phase, the cervical secretion is decreased in quantity and they become thick, tenacious and cellular, due to which it makes a plug like formation in the cervical opening and prevents the entry of the sperm through the cervical canal. Similarly, what are the changes that occurs in the vagina? There are no such changes occurring in the menstrual phases, but in proliferative phases, vaginal epithelium is thickened and cornified, due to which thickened and cornified. Similarly, in secretory phases, vaginal epithelium proliferates and gets infiltrated with the leukocyte, and vaginal secretion becomes thick and viscid in the secretory phase.